Welcome to Sisterhood Conference 2018. At this year's conference, we have an amazing lineup of speakers and presenters from across Australia and around the world, sharing with us their incredible wisdom and insight. We're so glad you can join us.
We are the Sisterhood team.
I want to start by diving straight into the Old Testament and the Old Testament story of the slaves on their mission to the Promised Land. The Israelites coming out of Egypt. It's a story of slaves who were set free, and they spent 40 years wandering around in the wilderness on a journey that should have taken 11 days to the Promised Land. 40 years on an 11-day journey. These were Israelites. They were free people after years as slaves under Pharaoh, and they preferred to stay wandering around in the wilderness, wandering around the same old mountains time and time and time again, rather than to step into the Promised Land that the Lord had told them to go in and possess. It was a land, as Deuteronomy says, that was flowing with milk and honey. It was a land that God said they would flourish and prosper in. So why did the Israelites wander for 40 years in the wilderness? In the book of Numbers, it tells us that Moses sent 12 spies into the Promised Land, one from each tribe. They were to assess the geographical nature of the land and the people that live in it. The spies went out, and this is what they saw. They saw fortified cities and the resident giants that lived in the land. They came back to the Israelites, and they told them the story. And they said, as Numbers says, "We went to the land to which you sent us, and it does indeed contain milk and honey. But the cities are fortified and very large, and there are giants in the land. Even the descendants of Anak, the Anak giants, are in the land." Out of the 12 spies, only 2 came back with a positive report: Caleb and Joshua. Caleb said in the book of Numbers, he silenced the people who were mumbling and complaining to Moses, saying, "We cannot possibly go into the Promised Land." And Caleb said, "We should go up and at once and possess it, for we can certainly do it. The Lord told us." But the Israelites, they disagreed, and they said, "No, we would rather wander around in the wilderness." And you know what? An entire generation died in the wilderness. An entire generation barred 2 people, those first 2 spies, who were the only living people that survived the wilderness wanderings to eventually go in and possess the Promised Land. And you know who those giants were, the giants that they found in the Promised Land? They were the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, all the ites. And we all have our own brand of ites, the grouchy neighborites, the annoying kiddites. One common ite that I know that we all have in common is the comparisites. And the comparisites can attach them to anything and everything. But their biggest camp that they have set up in this modern generation is social media. And I can tell you what, the 2 things that comparison does, comparisites is what they are, comparison is what they do. And if there is only 2 things that you take from this talk, comparison distracts and disempowers. And like the Israelites, an entire generation died in the wilderness, wandering around because they were too frightened to face their giants. An entire generation is wandering around in the wilderness of comparison because they are afraid to confront and defeat the ites of comparison. The ites of, that person has a better life than me. They look like they have a better looking husband. They're going on amazing holidays. Oh, she's so pretty and she's so thin. And these comparisites are attaching to people and leeching the life out of them, very much like any other parasite does. And we are left blindly wandering around in the wilderness, missing out on our God-given destiny because our eyes are skewed at the people around us, comparing ourselves to what they have. And I can tell you what, the one thing that I did when I was bogged down in this wilderness mentality of comparison, because I tell you what, when you are infiltrated and attached by comparasites, you are bogged down. And the one thing that I did that changed the whole game for me was stopping scrolling on social media. And for me, the Lord said to me, he said, you need to get your face off Facebook and get your face in the book, the Word of God. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it has changed my life, because the Word of God speaks to us about what God's plan and purpose and destiny is for our lives. There is no other way that we will enter into the promised land, the purpose, the plan, the destiny God has for us, if we are not willing to leave comparison behind, step out of our wilderness and step into the promised land and defeat those comparasites. So to finish, I want to go back to my Israelite story, the story of the two spies that were the only ones that survived, Caleb and Joshua. As Caleb said, we can surely possess it. And God blessed him for his dedication to and his faithfulness to God's promise. And ladies, I want to encourage you today that there are entire destinies, families, jobs, careers, ministries, relationships, but overall destinies that are at stake here. Unless we are willing to confront and defeat that giant of comparison, we will never step into that plan and purpose that God has for our lives. The promised land will not just fall on us. We have to go in and possess it. So let's be those women who, like Caleb says, let's go in at once and possess the land, for we can surely do it.
What does it mean to speak of the value and the dignity of women, to arise in our value and dignity? What does that mean? In the work that Jonathan and I get to do, we have the enormous privilege of speaking a lot. But the greater privilege for us is always when we get to listen and walk with people for a while. And as I listen to women's stories over many years, I hear a theme. And this theme has come to dominate their lives. It's almost the subtext or the background noise. It sounds like two words. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm too much. I'm sorry if I've overshared. I'm sorry if I've taken too much of your time. I'm sorry for interrupting you. I'm sorry if I'm not enough for you. I'm sorry. These words are very powerful. This sense of not feeling that they are enough, that they are worthy, and essentially that they are a problem. Now, many years ago, when I first met Sister Mary Rachel, she came to my house. And when she left, she grabbed my hands and she said, I want you to see the word sorry like a swear word. And I hadn't been in touch with how often I actually say it too. So I'm not standing up here saying that I've got this or so on up. Even yesterday, as we were setting the room up, I was like, oh, sorry, sorry. And then I was like, you hypocrite, giving this talk tomorrow on saying sorry. But I think we really need to address that, because the more I've noticed it in women's lives, the more I realise that we're not so much apologising for what we're doing as much as we're apologising for who we are. And we have incredible strength, incredible dignity when our womanhood is surrendered to Jesus Christ and we are redeemed. We can make a real difference in the world. Someone who spoke into this wound of not being enough, of feeling like women are a problem, was Pope St. John Paul II. And he, more than any of his predecessors, spoke and wrote very publicly on the value and the dignity of womanhood. And he says, girls, you are so far removed from being a problem, it's not funny. He says, you are, in fact, an answer. And you are an answer to so many of the problems that beset our culture today. And he really calls on us as women to get in touch with what he calls our feminine genius, the qualities that are unique to womanhood. Now, so often, if you're a businesswoman in a boardroom, it doesn't go down too well if you get emotional and start crying when they're discussing an issue. You would be seen as weak or not strong enough. But John Paul II actually says that this quality of sensitivity is so needed, and without it, our world is impoverished. He said that because we have the ability to carry and house new life, This predisposes our personality in a particular way to see the human person through the eyes of the heart and to respond in great love. So I really want to encourage you this weekend to get in touch with those qualities that are uniquely yours. There is not a one-size-fits-all look for femininity. We will all bring to manifestation and expression those qualities in unique and different ways. Thank you.
I want to speak to you today about how we can arise alongside men. Earlier this week, I had the privilege of hearing Jordan Peterson speak in Chatswood. For those who are not familiar, he's like an academic rock star at the moment. He's smashing social media. And one of the things that is so refreshing about what he does is that he affirms the differences between men and women. In fact, there was a study last year where some researchers looked at the genome, 20,000 genes in men and women, and they found that 6,500 of them, so almost 1/3, just under 1/3 of our genes, there were differences in the expression between men and women. Now, this is really revolutionary because before that, we always thought that our differences were just coded on the X and Y chromosome, like just the sex chromosomes. In fact, every chromosome has genes on it that has differences in our expression as men and women. And they found these differences in all sorts of places, like in our skin cells, in our liver, in our muscle, not just in our genitals and our sexual organs. And obviously, there's many differences in our brain as well. So it's really important, I think, for us to embrace the idea that we are not just different, but that we are gloriously different. And that we can approach our differences with wonder, with curiosity, with reverence and awe, and celebrate those differences as truly complementary. A few weeks ago, we were giving a talk to some seminarians up in Sydney, and we were talking about sexual differences. And we asked them to share with us some stories of examples where they had seen this experienced. And, we could talk about our children, how, our daughter, when she was 6 or 7, picked up a piece of coral and she said, "Oh, look at this beautiful piece of coral." And her younger brother took it and looked at it and was sort of in an L shape and he turned it into a gun. And one of the seminarians shared with us that his little niece and his brother and sister-in-law had been so eager to give their children equal exposure to boys and girls' toys. So there was never, this is the girls' toys and the boys' toys. And so they gave their daughter, the truck to play with. And they left her alone and came back a few minutes later. And there she had tucked the truck into bed and had carefully put the covers up over the truck so the truck needed a sleep. So beautifully encapsulates, I guess, some of the essence of femininity, that sort of sensitivity to the needs of others, or in this case, these other things that have been personified for this little girl. But I think one of the most important differences for us and practically in our lives is to appreciate the way that we experience love. And for men and women, there are quite significant differences. We all need love. We're created by love and for love, for union and for communion. But we experience it very differently. In fact, each of us experience it very uniquely. But for men and women, there is a general pattern. Some research done by a woman by the name of Shaunti Feldhahn a number of years ago was quite revealing. She asked groups of men and women to choose between two terrible alternatives: to either be alone and unloved in all the world, or to be inadequate and disrespected by everyone. And what she found is that men, like 75 to 80% of men, said it was worse to be inadequate and disrespected than it was to be alone and unloved. And the reverse was true for women, that we would much rather be inadequate and disrespected than alone and unloved. This highlighted for us and has helped us to sort of develop, I guess, a model around how do we articulate the ways in which men and women experience of love. And we came up with two words: respect and cherishment. Women, I believe, experience love primarily as cherishment. The dictionary definition gives us things like to hold dear, to show affection for, to care for tenderly, to keep a memory in mind. This really encapsulates for me certainly the way I like to be loved and also the way that I express love. This is what it looks like for us. And this is how we tend to express it to others. let's look at this event, the affection between us, the listening, the talking, the sharing of our lives, the caring, the nurturing, even the way the team has prepared this beautiful space for us. It's all part of that expression of that feminine way of cherishing and showing other people that we care for and love for them. Respect is another way to experience love. Our dictionary definition tells us it means to hold in high regard, to be deferential towards them, to praise, to be. Men are very highly sensitized to shaming each other because of their awareness that the experience of respect is so critical to their understanding and their experience of love. Now, we all want to be respected, and men want to be cherished as well. So it's not an issue of having one and not the other. It's an issue of what is the most effective, most powerful way for us to experience love. And for men, it is respect. When we talk about this in our couples seminars, a lot of women will say to me, but really he has to earn my respect. And I kind of go, well, really? Do you feel you need to earn your right to be cherished, to be loved? Isn't that our birthright, to be loved? And for a man, respect is how he experiences love. So our challenge for you today is that if you wish to arise alongside our men, we need to learn to love the men in our lives by loving them on their terms, not on our terms. That means respecting them, honouring them, affirming them. Our respect is conveyed not just in what we do, but also in avoiding the things that dishonour them or disrespect them. Things like criticism or shaming or gossiping about our men or comparing them. We feel so strongly about this as a key insight that we coined a phrase, smart loving, which became our brand name, but it's also a concept, it's a framework. It's a way of understanding love. That we love in a smart way when we love according to the way the other person experiences love. Our instinct is always to love in the way that we experience it. So when Byron comes home from work and I can see he's distracted and worried about something, my instinct kicks in and I do, what do? Do you want to talk about that? And he's always like, no, thanks, it's fine. Nothing's wrong. And I'll leave him alone for a few minutes and I'll come back, I'll wheel around, I'll try again. You sure you don't want to talk about it? I'm sure you'd feel better if you talked about it. Now, the reality is that if I'm worried and distracted, that's the way I want him to respond to me. That's the way I like my girlfriends to respond to me. And instinctively, that's what we do, isn't it? When we see one of our friends distracted and worried, we offer to sit with them and talk to them and tell me about it. Let me shoulder your burdens with you. That ain't what gets men going. So part of learning how to love Byron well has been learning to love him on his terms, not on my terms. And so I guess I leave you with that thought. We'll be unpacking it a little bit more later on today in my workshop, but to arise along men, it really means, I think, to think it in terms of how did they experience love and to dig deep within ourselves and within our reserves to bring a real genuine respect and reverence. Thank you.
I want to talk to you and equip you if you want to arise to turn to book, not to any book, to the book, Bible. 14 years ago, I went to a prayer group in Manchester. I used to live in UK. I walked in and they were worshipping and praising, and after the music and people had a quiet time, and then they start sharing. They had pictures and visions. They referred to scripture. They could connect. That said that God spoke to them. And I was like, wow. I went home that night and I was thinking, I want this. Like, I really want this. The following week, I went again. And when the music started, I started singing, but in my heart, I was praying and said, Lord, can you speak to me? Give me a picture, something little. And then suddenly I heard this voice, which said, God is love. So I look around, but they were all closed eyes. I thought, okay, still continue to praying, Lord, just one word, something small, a picture, a vision. And again, affirming voice said to me, God is love. And I said, yeah. Everybody knows that when pray group, God is love. So I ignored it. And I prayed again. Lord, speak to me, please. And then I heard number 678. And I thought, oh, that is not from God. I sat down, but something prompted me to open a Bible, which I've got it with me, a New Jerusalem Bible, on a page 678. And when I open, it's Psalm 103, which in my Bible, the title is God is Love. So you can imagine, I was so amazed. And I said, oh my gosh, he talks to me. Thank God I was sitting because I would fell off the chair. I shared with the prayer group, and the whole prayer meeting was based on that psalm. It's my favorite psalm, as you can imagine. But why I'm sharing this to you, because after that, I've realized the Lord is saying to me, I can talk to you, but you need to learn my language. And how can you do this? Through Bible. You can read. And I start reading and digesting and going through scripture after scripture from the New Testament and the Old Testament. And then suddenly it all started making a sense for me. It was like the disciples going to Emmaus. He's got the victory, but there is so much. There is his plan and purpose and promises, I call them 3 P's, for our lives. And you can find it when you sit lonely, when you feel abandoned. If you turn to the book, he will be there waiting for you. And his purpose and plan for your life is so amazing, but you can only find if you read. And that's the basis of our faith. That's the base of our being. That's a manual for our life. So I just want to encourage you so much to turn to the Bible. And just at the end, I will read a couple of verses from Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, my soul. From the depths of my being, his holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul. Never forget all his acts of kindness. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I've been given the light and fluffy topic of shame and vulnerability to finish today's session with. So when I took on the current role that I'm in with the Disciples of Jesus community, which is a lay-led Catholic community, I went up to another leader in Sydney and said, what advice do you have for me? And he said, get out of the wheelchair and walk. I was like, what? That's the advice? And I think that's the advice I've got for us today about shame and vulnerability. And you might think, what's the connection? So some of what I'm unpacking, Brene Brown, I don't know who's heard about Brene Brown, but Gifts of Imperfection, I've got some stuff out of there today, just so you don't think I've made up these definitions. But she defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love or belonging. And I believe this mindset, this shame is what keeps us in the wheelchair. It's this that can paralyze us, this flawed thinking that we aren't worthy, that we are flawed. And I know that that's been true for my life, that I thought that I wasn't good enough to do the job that I was asked to do, that I was unworthy, that I would fail. But the thing about shame is we all have it. And the more that we don't talk about it, the more power it actually gives to shame to keep us in the chair. And we're afraid to talk about it. But the good news is that when shame is identified, it's a vehicle for change. And that enables us to get out of the wheelchair and to stand up and to walk. So what's the definition of vulnerability? It's uncertainty, risk of emotional exposure. It is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, and courage. It's the source of hope and accountability and authenticity. And if we want greater clarity and purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path. It goes against what we think. We think we're safe and it's good to be in the wheelchair. But actually, when we move in vulnerability, we move out and we actually are going to be far more alive. We're going to be standing tall in who we are as God has called us to be. So, if we want to get out of the wheelchair, vulnerability. If we want to walk in freedom, vulnerability. And so let us start to move in the direction, like Esther, She was able to rise out of doubt and fear and complacency. And she was able to stand in her place. For such a time as this, we too are being called to stand up for who we are and who we're called to be. We're not flawed. We do belong, that we are good enough. And so I'm going to leave us with 6 practical tips. 6 isn't like a normal number, but limited time calls for limited numbers. Prayer, that we need to be people of women of prayer, to go and seek the Lord and what he would speak into us, and to be vulnerable first with God. And also the beautiful sacrament of reconciliation that we have been given as Catholics is an amazing place to go and to free ourselves of shame, and a way in which we can actually really enable us to arise. That we need to believe in our value and worth as a daughter of God. And these just aren't words, that we need to believe it deep in the midst of our being, and the truth in every cell of our being. We need to really control our thoughts, because we are in a battlefield of the mind, and that there's thoughts come upon us, I'm sure all of us, I know that I do, thinking, no, Fiona, you're not good enough. Don't do that. Don't stand up. But we need to stand up. We need to stand up for the truth of who we are, and being vulnerable and real and authentic. See, the thing is, when you've been in a wheelchair for a while, and then you get someone up to walk, I'm a nurse, their legs are weak, their muscles, they're not strong. And that's why we need women around us to help support us, because we cannot do it alone. It's strength when we come together. So choose some women in your circle, create a circle of strength that can support and encourage you. I mean, Moses had Aaron and Hur. So if he needed 2 men, we need mighty women around us to help us, that we can be authentically real with, that we can share, and that they can encourage us. But you know what? They can also call us out, that they can say, you know what, Fiona, that's not right. That's a wrong thought, or that's a good thought. Because we need people not just to be fluffy and nice, but we need people that can be real and call us on and challenge us. And that's not the Facebook world. You know, you could put it out there on Facebook, but we need, not for the world to know, but for those people around us, and that choose wisely. So I would ask on this time in the day that we've got left, to start to pray about who could be your women, who could be your strong arms to help you to walk and to rise and to be the woman of God that you're called to be. So, number 6, so they're all jumbled in, but anyway, authentic lives, that we need to be real up front. We need to be ourselves. I can't be who I'm not. I can only be Fiona. And when I do that, that's when I'm alive. So my prayer is that may each one of us arise today from our chairs of shame and move in freedom of vulnerability and authenticity for such a time as this. Thank you.
There's been so much wisdom shared with us this weekend, so much to take home with us and to take back into our daily lives. And we're so glad that you could join us here at Sisterhood Conference 2018.
A lot of talk in our church today about the new evangelisation, and we might ask, well, what's new about the new evangelisation? One thing that's new is that we're trying to renew the faith in people who should already be Catholic, should already be Christian. Individuals, families, communities, whole cultures that need to rediscover the gospel. And so what's new is that they're getting a new shot in the arm of faith, of evangelisation. Another thing that's new about it is the way that we do that, and the new media and groups like Shalom World TV are very important for bringing the gospel anew to our cultures, to our families, to each of us individually. And so I encourage all the viewers of Shalom World TV, and I encourage Shalom World TV themselves to keep up the good work, to keep watching this channel and to keep up the good work of presenting the Catholic faith to our world today.
Shalom World, God's own channel.